Hello, my name is Birgitta Bergsten. I'm a balance registered saddling consultant. And if you're going to watch this video or presentation, it's most likely because you and I are going to meet quite soon to test out what saddles your horses or horse likes or not likes. This is an obligatory theory session I do for everybody. And that's not because I don't think you don't know already. You probably do know a lot of what I'm going to talk about, but it's maybe something you haven't put in context with saddles and saddling before. Also, if we are going to work together as a team in the future, I need to know that you know this, so we stand on the same basis. Okay, so I'm going to start the presentation right now, and I would suggest that if you have any questions, you just make a note of them, and if you haven't got the answers you are looking for at the end of the presentation, then you have them ready for me when I come and see you. Okay, so let's go. There. So, balance has now been going on for 27 years. And it's a long and remarkable story, and I think I'm going to be quite brief. It all started with Leslie Taylor and Carol Brett, two phenomenal women. They are horse trainers, not business people and not saddle manufacturers. And the whole reason balance came about was because these two girls had noticed that many of the horses they were working with were moving restricted in the movements while ridden or wearing equipment, whereas with the same horses, when they were out in the field, they moved very effortless, athletic and beautiful. So they wanted to know the difference. And they have been, through all these years, continued to do research, finding out about horses' natural movement, behavior, soundness and health. It's all very important for all of us that work with this system. Sadly, we lost Carol 2 years ago. So now the company only exists of Leslie. To her help, she's got Teresa in the office, and a lot of you who have bought things, saddles and other equipment from Balance will have had contact with our Teresa, and you know that she is a super efficient woman, and without her, I don't know what we would do. I have a bunch of crazy colleagues. They are as crazy as me. We go around and talk and share our experience and knowledge with as many people as possible. We are not employed by Balance. We are all self-employed. So, as I said, Carol and Leslie wanted to do research on why horses it's very noisy here where I live, I'm sorry. You have to put up with the odd car or lorry booming past here, but I hope you can hear me. Yes, so they spent many years in the States and in the UK researching horses using different equipment, working with professional trainers, veterinarians, a lot of professional people involved in the horse world. And what they found was that it depended on the design features in the saddles, but also how the saddle had been fitted, in German geangepasst, if the horses were moving good or bad. And what we are looking for when we do the saddle testing today is the quality of movement. That's what we are interested in. Quality of movement, effortless movement with as little stress as possible on the horse's body. And the balance saddling system as such, you can then say, has been designed by horses for horses. So it's nothing that Carol and Leslie have been sitting in an office and thinking, this is clever, let's use this. No, they have thoroughly researched every single item, including the pads and the material used, if horses likes them or not. And my own story is, I'm from Sweden. I used to train with Mr. Petrus Kasterman. He is unfortunately not here either. And he was a conventional horse trainer. But I have to say, what he taught me way back in the 70s, 80s, they were very valuable lessons. And when I say conventional, I would say maybe he doesn't compare with today's conventional trainers at all. Basic knowledge that goes well in hand with what Carol and Leslie later taught me. And once I started to understand about horses' anatomy and biomechanics, then that belief I had in his training has just been more confirmed. So when I trained with him, the emphasis was on cross-country and eventing. And at the time in Sweden, there wasn't many competitions around. You had to travel a lot. So I had an opportunity to move to England with my horse at the time, and that's how I met Carol. I had been in England 2 years. I've just started with my quite young horse just to compete. And I had, as out of interest, I had just bought 3 saddles the year before I met Carol, 3 new saddles. And so when I was told to come and listen to this woman who had done all this research, I wasn't, from a financial point of view, very interested, I have to say. But I always like to know when there is something new. And so I went. And I met Carol, and she talked me through the theory. And then she asked very humbly if she could try her saddles on my horse. But first she wanted to see me ride in my own saddle. So that's what we did. And thank God for that, because I had a very strong experience with my horse. Or we can also say between Carol and my horse, I didn't stand a chance. So that was then, 1992. The way my horse moved, just, it was like a dream come true. Everything I believed in as a rider just happened. And it was just, whoa, yeah, mind-boggling. So when Carol eventually asked if I wanted to become a saddle consultant, I said, yes, I do. Professionally, I have been working as a nurse and doing this, working with horses, was more appealing to me. So that's a long time ago, and now I am traveling between Switzerland, Germany, a little bit of Italy, sometimes the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg. It depends on, because where I live, I have a long trip to travel to you. I live down in the southwest of France, and I have got my 3 horses of various sorts. They take their time too. So let's kickstart this then with, there are 4 facts about horses that you need to remember when you work with horses in general, not just about saddles. But these facts are most likely things most people agree about and know about, but not necessarily have put those in context with saddles and saddling. So the first one is the survival instinct. So in the wild, the predator would always scan the herd of horses or other animals, and he would, because he was clever, not go for the horses that moved in a rhythmical way, because that means they were fast. He would rather choose those that moved in a not so rhythmical way, because that means they are slower. So horses that learn to compensate their lamenesses or any other reasons for being hindered in the movement, they survived the best. So there's an instinct that was developed many thousand years ago, and it's still there today. And this instinct, the survival instinct, allows us humans to put different training equipment on horses that do not allow natural, efficient movement. So that's kind of crazy. That means that the horses are their own worst enemies, really. But it also means that we as humans, if we are going to continue to ride horses, we have to learn to pay more respect to the horses' needs and help them to take care of themselves. So, and this is the one reason you will see horses performing quite well in quite narrow saddles. I'm saying quite well because it depends on what your references are. There are a lot of biomechanic experts out there that have written books and done studies, etc., etc. They may very well have a different opinion on what biomechanic efficient movements are compared to what I have and what Balance have. So you have to ask the question, what are they basing their theories on? What have they studied? If they say they have studied ridden horses and all those horses that have won gold Olympics the last 50 years, well, I'm sorry, it doesn't cut it for me, because these horses may very well be moving with a compensation mechanism in their bodies. And it's only when we look at horses that do not have any interference with humans. So you look at wild horses, there's still a risk there because the wild horses may not be healthy on the day we observe them. Little foals are quite good, but also if you do dissection of dead horses, then you can learn all about bone density, etc., etc. And that's a combination of those 3. You will learn more about what biomechanically efficient movements are. That's at least my belief. So the saddles can play a big role in how horses are, general health are. So if a horse is injured, in the wild, for instance, and he learns to compensate for that period of time and then go back to normal movements, it's not a big deal. But the danger is if it's the saddles causing this. So every time that horse is ridden in that saddle, he learns to move with a compensation mechanism. And for every day in his ridden life, that will cause stress on his body eventually, because he's not using it as he should, and therefore the risk of injury will be higher as well. So the survival instinct is important to remember when you choose your equipment, and realize that, yeah, the horses may look like it's moving well. So that's a problem. The other one you need to know about is horses are animals that follow the line of least resistance. And this is very handy when we ride and train horses. And because if you put the leg on, the horse will move away from that pressure. But remember, that will also happen if you put a saddle on that has high pressure on one point. If it's too narrow or too wide and unbalanced, it will tip forward and put lots of pressure on a small area behind the shoulders. The horse will drop his back away from that. So there is also saddles out there that have some kind of mechanism there, where the points can yield outwards like this as the horse's shoulders moves. Sounds very logical for a human, but the horse will not push anything out of the way. So it's not as effective as you would like to believe it is. There are flexible trees, all sorts of things out there. You just have to question yourself when you see these. Does that really work for a horse? How does horses react? Well, you know, follow the line of least resistance. The horses will not push against something if they can avoid it. The third point, horses will not vocalize discomfort or pain like a dog or a pig. They react emotionally instead. And you will see that often in the saddle consultations, that the horse can change behavior from saddle to saddle. It's quite remarkable. Horses that might have been called lazy and unwilling often starts to move more smoothly, more willing and happy. Horses that has not tolerated having a saddle on may very well be in discomfort, but give them a comfortable saddle. They are happy and allow a rider on them. That's just two extremes. There are many, many signs in between those two that could be an expression on being in discomfort. That is if the horse is not behaving according to the norm, whatever that is. Yeah. So if your horse is not behaving as you would expect him to do, if you know your horse well, then you have to look into, is there a possibility of pain or discomfort, and what is causing it? It could be your saddle. The fourth point is most horses have got black skin, which makes it very difficult to see bruising or hematomes. In German, you would call them Blauflächen, and saddles can cause those. So we're going to look at the basic equine construction a little bit. And as you can see here, the front legs are considerably straighter designed than the hind legs are. But there are a few other points here I want to point out before we go on to each of these sections. And if you look at the front legs and shoulder blades, horses have not got the collarbone. So there's no bone connections between the collarbones and the front legs and the rest of the body. The only thing that attaches them together and to the rest of the body is tendons, ligaments, and muscles. Sehnen, Binden, and Muskeln. Whereas the hind legs, I'm sorry I haven't put a little arrow here, but if you start with the femur, that's the thigh bone, you have a solid ball and socket joint from the femur into the pelvis, the becken. And that's the strongest joint, gelenk, that you can have in a body. Then the pelvis is attaching to the spine via the sacroiliac gelenk. And therefore, you have a bone connection here to the rest of the body. So the hind legs are better connected to the front end of the horse than the front legs are. That's quite remarkable. And I think that also tells you a little bit about what should happen if the horse is carrying weight, such as a rider. Then in the middle, you have the spinosis processes. The processes are like spikes coming up from the vertebrae. And in the middle there where the red line is, you can see that they are pointing towards each other. And that happens when the horse is standing at a natural posture at rest, where the back is relaxed and down. So in movement, the horses should lift the back in that area. And that means that the processes are coming apart a little bit. So that's important information, especially if you have horses with tendency to back problems and kissing spines. So what are the front legs then supposed to do? Well, they are excellent to support weight that stands still, because they are like the pillars. They are not so good to support weight in movement, because to do that you need shock absorption, and there isn't enough in the front legs. You have a little bit in the shoulder joint, the elbow, and the fetlock joint. But that's not enough in order to keep the horse healthy. And you can just have in mind how many injuries a lot of horses have in the front legs. But in movement, the job of the shoulder blade and the front leg is to stay out of the way from the rest of the body. And the movement should be very smooth and effortless, like a pendulum nearly. So we're going to watch a little video I recorded earlier, where I will demonstrate in a very simple way what I'm talking about. So I'm going to demonstrate to you in a very simple way the action of the shoulder blade of the horse and his or her front leg. So if you imagine this being the shoulder blade of the horse, the hoof is down here, the head is there. So in each single step the horse takes, the shoulder blade will swing backwards, which brings the front leg forward. As the front leg starts to travel back underneath the body of the horse, the shoulder blade goes forward. So you have this swinging movement going on in each single step the horse takes. And they should really be as synchronized as possible. And you can notice I only need to make a small swing up at the top to create the bigger swing at the bottom. Now imagine you have something restricting that swing up here. That will mean that the swing down here is very affected by that. It can't swing.
So if it's the horse will then start to compensate for that blockage using muscles in his neck that he shouldn't have to use to move the front leg. And the movement will not be smooth, and the horse will not have shoulder freedom.
So the hind legs then, in the balance language we call them levers. So levers would be hebel effect. And as such, they are much better to support dynamic weight because they can shock absorb. You got the hip joint, the stifle, the hock joint, and the fetlock joint. So in German, there would be the Hüfte, the knee, Sprunggelenk, and Fesselgelenk. So those joints have the possibility to close and open. So you can have like a Stützdämpfen feathering effect here. And a lever can propel weight in any desired direction. With the horses, this is forward, upward. So propelling weight, and they can shock absorb. And if they are in the correct position in relation to the weight, it's going to lift. You can lift maximum weight with minimum effort. So when you close joints, you create energy. And when you open up those joints, you release the energy. So that's what really is sending the horse forward, upward. And collection is something a lot of people say, that's for dressage rider. No, if we are going to ride horses, we need to have some degree of collection. Otherwise, the horses will be very unbalanced. And collection is basically based on that the hind legs takes one step at a time in underneath the horse, lands on the ground, closing the joints so it shock absorbs, and comes out a little bit behind the body, come up in the air, forward in, one step after another, and in a rhythm. That's all there is to it, really. But there's a few other things that needs to happen for the hind legs to be able to step in, and we're going to look at that in a minute. So in natural movements, horses, that will need to move, for whatever reason, will engage the levers. So they shift the weight away from the forehand over to the back end. So at rest, which is natural for horses to have the weight of the forehand, they do that so they can rest the engine, the back end. But as soon as they want to get going, they have to shift the weight away from the front legs, the pillars, over to the levers, and then off. So that sounds all very wonderful. What we have to remember also is it is not natural for horses to carry weight. So if you have a horse that's not been trained to carry a rider, or is old and maybe a little bit weak in his back, and you put a rider on, they will simply just follow the line of least resistance, which means they're going to drop the back. And with a dropped back, you will soon see that the hind legs will not be able to step in and support the front end anymore. So the horse will then learn very quickly to move with too much weight on the forehand, because that's what horses do in order to compensate. They don't fight normally. So if we're going to ride horses, then it's our responsibility to train the horses to carry weight in an efficient way. So we're going to have a little look here.
So the horse is using his hind legs as levers. So levers, or in German Hebel effect, they're very useful if you're going to lift things as a human. But it's the same for the horse if they're going to lift and move the weight away from the forehand over to the hindquarters. So if we look here now, I've got my grooming set in that box, and it's quite heavy. And if I'm not moving my levers now, it's impossible to lift. So instead, if I move my levers closer to what I want to lift, close the joints. So think of the horse, close the hip joints, the knee joints, the ankle joints. This is life setup. It's just a simple demonstration of how important it is to have your levers in the right position in relation to the weight you're going to lift.
And there you have a pretty nice picture of all those joints we were talking about in action, and they should work equally much. If the horse is blocked in his back and can't get the hind legs forward in underneath the body, you will often see one of these joints work less than the others, or one joint moving more than the others. I think the commonest I see is that the hip joint stays more or less open the whole time and very little closure there. So that means then that you have stress on all the other joints in the body, in the hind leg. Other things you can see is the rotation of the hoof as the hoof lands on the ground. That's also a compensation pattern. So ideally what you want to see is that all those joints are working equally much. You want to see the hind hoof land on the ground and spend equal time on the ground as he is in the air. What I often see with horses that are blocked in the back is that the hind hoof is on the ground for longer than it is in the air. So between the pillars and the levers you have a bridge, and bridges are there to help to connect 2 points, but also to support and distribute weight. In the horses we create a lot of energy in the back end, and that needs to travel to the front end, and it does so across this bridge. However, the bridge will have to lift in order for the levers to step into the right place. And what you then see is that the abdominal muscles contract a little bit, and the muscles on the horse's back will relax. He will activate the long pairs of ligaments that run from the ears across the withers, where the first sets of ligaments stops, and the next one takes on and goes all the way over to the tail. So that they are like it's like a pulley system, which when the horse engages his hindquarters and send the hind legs in, it activates the long back ligament, and when he is stretching forward with his head and neck to compensate what's going on at the back end, that activates the neck ligament. In German, Langen-Nackenband and Langen-Rückenband. Okay, so this is where it's becoming a bit more interesting from a saddling point of view. If you measure your horse when he stands still at a natural posture, Körpershaltung for standing still, and the horse on the left represents this. The back is relaxed and a little bit down, and the head and neck is a little bit up, and the weight is on his front legs. So if you measure him then across the withers, behind the shoulder blades, where the front of the saddle would sit. The left horse corresponds to the red line. On the right picture, or the picture to the right, we have to mimic what happens in the so-called upswing of the back and measure a horse there. And you can see what the difference it is in width. So then have in mind that most ridden horses are fitted, angepasst, with their saddles to fit the shape of the horse, which is only natural when he stands still. A lot of saddling method does not allow for the horses to lift the back, unfortunately. But because of horses' ability to compensate, they learn to move with the back down. That means, without question or doubt, that they are traveling over ground with too much weight on the front legs, which they are not designed to do, and the hind legs out behind the body in a place where they're not designed to be either. So, yeah, the fact is that a horse in movement will actually go through both these shapes. So as the hind leg starts to travel in underneath the body, the back will lift up and the hind leg hits the ground and start to come up behind the body, the back goes down a little bit. So the horse will change shape in each single step it takes. So I ask you again, does it make sense then to fit your saddle to a static shape when it has nothing to do with the shapes the horse will go through in movement?
So we're going to do a little exercise that you can join in with after you have watched me doing it. So if I stand with a bit of a hollow back, in German you call it Hohlkreuz, and I bring a leg up, I can comfortably get to there. Then I start to feel a little bit of tension here. Yeah, I can't get any further. So if I instead allow my back, lower back to round and soften my sternum, so I shorten my front side. So the distance between my belly button and my sternum gets shorter, which means I swing my rib cage backwards. And I can do that easily. So this is just highlighting how important it is for the horse to be able to lift his back in order to engage from behind. You can also yourself find out if you have a hollow back. Get your leg up and try to do leg using. I can come to there with my leg now. And if I allow my lower back to round, soften my sternum, that is not difficult. I have no tension here, no pain. So that is something to think about. And yes, the saddle will have an impact on how well the horse can engage his hindquarters.
So finally, we're going to talk about the head and the neck. So the head is very heavy. It's a big bone structure. And it sits on a long neck. And because of this, the horse can then use this to counterbalance what's going on in the rest of the body. So if you think about or imagine the horse being able to engage, meaning rolling the pelvis in such a way it starts to send or allow the hind legs to step in underneath the body, and take the weight away from the front end. But this needs to be counterbalanced by something with the head and neck being stretching forward and down a little bit with an open throat lash, or you often call ganache in German. And the highest point will then be the atlas, just behind the ears. That should always be the highest point of the neck. If you have the other scenario where the horse cannot lift his back, so the hind legs are then out behind the body. They're not in a place now where they can support the weight of the front end. So all the energy and the weight is now pushed into the front end, down into the sternum of the horse. And the head and the neck, if you have that far out in front of the horse, that will become quite uncomfortable and unbalanced, and horses do not like to be unbalanced. They will bring the head and neck up and back, and then they will close the throat lash or the ganache. And you may also then see the highest point is not longer just behind the ears, it's the next vertebra back. And that is, in my opinion, not what I want to see in a ridden horse. But that is a compensation mechanism to counterbalance and move something very heavy out in front of them a little bit closer to the body. The horses will also swing the rib cage sideways. There's a slight rotation. So goes left, right, left, right, left, right. Most horses are born either left or right-handed, just like we are. So they have their sort of pattern, natural pattern. However, if you're riding a horse like that, it means if we don't help them to become straight in the middle, that means they will have more weight and stress on one set of legs than the other pair of legs. So it's not so good. So what you will see then is, for instance, that the horse is bending to the right. So the head and neck goes to the right in order to counterbalance for the ribs that now are longer and further away from the middle on the left side, and vice versa. So that's not very helpful. That does not allow for the hind legs to work in an efficient way. One hind leg will be further out away from the body than the other one. But again, the horse will use his head and neck then in a compensatory way to counterbalance imbalance in the rest of the body. And often they also use the muscles in the neck to assist movement if they are not in balance, which shouldn't happen. So basically the horse will put his head and neck where he needs it to be for him to keep in a fair balance. But if that means he's not moving in a biomechanically efficient way, rather than getting your training aids out of various sorts and spurs, just look at if the horse can lift his back, yes or no. If it's down, well, then you need to change something. Are the hind legs in or out, yes or no? And the ribs, are they swinging equally left, right, because they should if the horse is properly trained and you properly trained as a rider. And this is something I try to help a lot of my clients with, the lateral balance. It's not very difficult, but it's difficult when you're not aware. When something becomes a habit, you don't notice it so well, and then you can't compensate or correct it. But when you become more aware what you are doing with your body and can feel what the horse is doing in his body, then it's easy to correct that. You will hear me talk about Feldenkrais a lot, and that's a method Balance have been using for many, many years, and it's very, very effective in helping riders and horses. So, If you look at the spine, you will see that the spine has got the same width the whole way back. I'm sorry, spine in German will be Wirbelsäule. So the whole width, because of the width being the same the whole way back, the canal between the two panels on the saddle needs to have at least 5 centimeters width between the panels in order to not cause problems near the spine, because horses are incredibly sensitive in that area. They have on each side of the processes and the vertebrae, you've got tendons, ligaments, you've got muscles, you've got nerves coming out there, going off to different organs in the body. So consequently, your saddle can actually create problems in other organs. You have acupressure points, reflex points, meridians, chakras, you name it, it's all there. And it's very, very important that we keep this area safe and comfortable. So we're going to have a little look at muscles, and I'm not going to go through all of them, and I'm happily admitting I do not know all the names of all the muscles, but it's important to understand what's happening with muscles if they have excessive pressure on them over a period of time. So the first muscle that we want to talk about is the trapezius muscle, and that's the one which the arrow is pointing towards. And the saddle, the front of the saddle, will sit on top of the back end of that muscle. This muscle controls the rotation and lifting of the shoulder blade. If your saddle is too narrow or too wide and unbalanced, so it tips forward, it will create pressure on this muscle. And it takes probably about 20 minutes after that, and the blood circulation in that area will then close down. And no muscle cell will be happy to work without oxygen and nutrition. So the muscle cell starts to be starved. But they will still do their best to create energy. And during those circumstances, you will always get too much lactic acid. If you don't have enough fluid coming into a muscle, you certainly don't have enough fluid going out. So the flushing out of all those waste products cannot happen so good either. So that means you get waste product stored in the muscle tissue in that area. This will lead to muscle atrophy. And if that happens in the trapezius muscle, you will soon get this spreading down to the next muscle group and the next muscle group. So you can't, very rarely that you can have one problem localized to one muscle. If it affects the trapezius muscle and it goes on every time you ride the horse, it will soon affect the whole body of the horse. Parallel to the blood circulation, you also got the lymphatic system, which is so important for a horse's immune system and yours in your body. The lymphatic system is not pumped around the body by the heart, it's the muscle pump. So for a body to work in a healthy way, an efficient way, the muscles, each single muscle in the body will have to be able to contract and relax, contract and relax. And the relaxation period has to be long enough to allow for the blood to come into the muscles. And then the muscle contract and that helps to push out the blood again. So the muscle pump is incredibly important for the horse's health, and the saddle has got the potential to disturb this. So that sounds maybe a little bit depressing, but on a positive note, if you know this, then if you have a horse with health issues, then movement can also be therapeutic if it's done in the right way. So the saddle is important. It's the right size for your horse, and it's comfortable, and it's spreading the weight correctly of you and the saddle itself, and that you ride in the correct speed of the tempo. So that is the speed in kilometers per hour and the speed of the tempo, two different things. The tempo is basically the speed of the rhythm. And if you go too fast, the muscles do not have time to relax between each contraction, so that's not so good. If you go too slow, the horses tend to brace themselves a little bit, and then the muscles get a bit contracted and not enough relaxed. So that's not good. So the right tempo is important. If the horses are blocked by the saddles behind the shoulder blade, so the shoulder blade cannot rotate or lift as it should, horses lift the shoulder blades when they jump or go over uneven ground. They will have to compensate, and they often use the muscles in the neck to assist movement of the front leg, and that will be the muscle I haven't really pointed out here, but it starts behind the ears and it goes down to the forearm. So it's the brachiocephalic muscle. This muscle will be activated in order to help movement of the front legs if the horses are blocked in the back and the shoulders. Then, if we look at the longissimus dorsi, which the arrow is pointing towards here, it starts at the pelvis, and it goes forward underneath the shoulder blade, where it goes off in two different branches. One goes up towards the neck and the other one in the direction of the sternum, the breastbone. And this muscle has to relax and lengthen in order for the back to be able to lift. And the saddle has got potential to make this muscle contracted, and therefore the horse cannot lift his back. It doesn't matter how wide the saddle is. If it's uncomfortable and the panels are wrong and haven't got the right correct weight distribution, the panels may be too hard and too soft, so they are not shock absorbent enough. That will make that muscle contract, and then the horse cannot lift his back. So we want to talk a little bit about saddle trees and the reason why there are saddle trees inside a lot of saddles. And that is because we ride with stirrups, stajbyggen, and they need to hang off from something. So you have the stajbygge avhängen, stirrup bars in English, and the two middle arrows are pointing towards those. Now the bars needs to hang off from something or be attached to something that creates the bridge across the spine of the horse. Otherwise we would have pressure directly on the spine from the stirrups. So that will be highly uncomfortable for the horses, if not even painful, because they are so sensitive over the spine. The saddle tree should also create a bridge for us to sit on, so we are not directly on the spine. As you can see here, also a saddle tree offers a stable point between two moving beings, you and the horse. However, if you then look at the arrow to the left, furthest left, you can see that the tree is actually making an indentation in the muscles of the horse here. So it's an angular seat, which most likely is very more comfortable for a human, but that does not correspond to a healthy horseback. The point, or what you call Ortspitzen, that's the arrow at the front of the tree. They are digging into the soft muscle tissue there in order to keep the head plate, the Kopfeisen, away from the withers. Now, this is obviously not a tree that we are using in the balance saddles. The balance saddles would be, if we start at the back of the tree, they would be flat, so no pressure on the horse's back there. The stirrup bars here on this picture, they are actually pointing in towards the horse, but on ours they will be more aligned with the bar above it, so it's no pressure on the horse. Then the points, they are flaring out away from the horse and backwards, so they really are not putting any pressure on the muscle tissue there or interfere with the shoulder blade. And the head plate, the Kopfeisen, is more U-shaped and open like this. Then it is a horse-friendly tree and can act in a positive way for the horse. And they're still comfortable for humans. So I often get, I forgot a little point here. The other job for the tree, apart from creating the bridge, is to help to distribute the weight equally between the front and the back and from side to side of the rider and the saddle itself. So I often get questions about treeless saddles because they are very popular, and riding bareback. So if we start with riding bareback, it's probably a very good thing to do to train your own balance, but it's not a good solution in the long term instead of a horse-friendly saddle. Only because we are sitting so close to the horse, and the horses are, as you know, very sensitive. They can feel a little fly on the skin, and we haven't got enough cushioning on our seat bones, so they will be then digging into the horse's backs quite easily, and that's not very good. So you don't have the bridge then that help to protect them from us. However, yes, the Red Indians, the Native Americans, they rode bareback, but that was a different time. These guys were probably very athletic and balanced in their bodies, and an athletic and well-balanced body is easier to carry than a not balanced body. And the horses were also very well trained because they worked a lot. Today, we have to be honest that a lot of us are not as athletic as these guys were. And our horses are lucky if they are worked more than an hour a day. So they're not as strong as these ponies were at the time in their backs. And if you're going to do it, you have to ride your horse with collection, so the back is lifted all the time. So then we come to the treeless saddles, and there's a little bit the same problem there with the weight distribution. It's better than riding bareback, but you also got the issue here with the stirrup bars not having a bridge to protect the spine from. So, but I wouldn't rule out the treeless saddles, because they can often be a very good interim and affordable solution. But in the long term, you have to look at protecting the muscles underneath where the stirrups are hanging from, and make sure that you have a good enough weight distribution. And you have to ride your horse in a collective way, because the lack of weight distribution here, if you are not helping the horse to lift his back and be in a lifted state, he will follow the line of least resistance and just drop his back down. So yeah, I would rather recommend then a saddle with a horse-friendly tree inside it. That's more helpful for the horse. So we're going to look at a couple of problems that we see in a lot of horses, and they both have to do with high pressure in what we call the junction box area. So the green line is pointing towards this area. In German, it would be Treffpunkt. And we call it junction box because it's an area where a lot of muscles are overlapping. You have reflex point there. So if you apply pressure there, the horse will drop his back. You got a lot of nerve complexes and blood circulation going on in this area. So if you have too high a pressure in that area, that means the blood supply into that muscle will be very low and close down, and you will get muscle atrophy, which in combination with not being able to lift the back, the horse is now training himself to stand with too much weight on his forehand and hang over his front legs. You can see the sternum is pushing out there. It's very protruding sternum. Then his back is very angular. His pelvis is rotated backwards, which only send the hind legs backwards. So already just watching how this horse is standing at the rest is telling me a lot. And fitting a saddle to match his shape would not help him at all. He would run the risk to have a lot of different problems in his body. But everything here you see can actually be rehabilitated if most of all change the saddle, but maybe also look at the training of the horse. A remedial program would be absolutely appropriate for him, and then he could look different. The other thing that we see is the dropped back. So because of this reflex point I talked about, if that's stimulated on a regular basis, the horses will start to stand with a drop back out of habit. And then the longissimus dorsi muscle is then contracted. So it pulls the pelvis forward, the top end of the pelvis forward, which only allows the hind legs to stick out behind the body of the horse. And you see on the horse to the left how the sternum is protruding there. There's a connection between where the green arrow is and the sternum. And then, of course, something has to give. So the longissimus dorsi muscles on top of the back are contracted, That means that the abdominal muscles will have to relax in order to give way for him. And consequently then, a lot of people think they have a fat horse with a short back. And neither of these two horses are fat or have short backs. They have got most likely a wide rib cage and allow that back muscle to decompress. They will start to lift the back up, so they will look straighter in the back, and the top of the hindquarters will be more look more symmetrical and more in balance with the front end of the horse. The sternum will probably soften as well. The abdominal muscles should start to tone up, and then the horse would look in a better nick than it does there. So both of those shapes there would be able to recover if they had an appropriate saddle that do not match their shape they have now, because this shape and the posture is a damaged one. If you have a saddle that is banana shaped, the weight distribution will be right in the middle on a small area, and that will only contribute to this picture of the drop back. So not very helpful. So when I look at horses at the saddling consultations, if the horse have got muscle atrophy and maybe also a damaged posture, then I will not choose a saddle to match that. But the saddle has to be wide enough so I have room for 2 pads underneath. So first I will use a wool pad, and wool which is a natural fiber of high quality wool, which creates like a shock absorber. So it helps to absorb the constant changes in the horse's body in movement, but it will also help to breathe air in underneath the pad. We have 2 different thicknesses, and in my experience, I found that most horses prefer the thicker wool pad than the thinner one. But it's the horses that choose this, not me. And the second pad we have, that will be the one you see at the bottom, is a Pro Complete base pad. We have a couple of different variations on this pad. It could be a different material, but it's the same function. It's thicker in the front than it is in the back. And the thickness in front will help to eliminate pressure from the stirrup bars and to eliminate pressure on the reflex point we talked about. It will also help to balance the saddle. And how much padding we have underneath the balanced saddle depends on many different things. It could be, if it's an unbalanced rider, I need to protect the horse a little bit more. If it's a very skilled and balanced rider, but the horse is very weak and damaged in his body, then again I need more pads. If the horse is really, really healthy and good in his body and strong, then and the rider is supportive and ride the horse in a supportive way, you could have less pads. But there will always be a wool pad and 1 more pad on top of the wool pad for a balanced saddle to act as a balanced saddling system. If there's no room for those pads, then the saddle is simply too narrow. So it's not a joke. A balanced saddle without the pads on the horse should not fit. It should be too wide. If it fits, it's too narrow. We have the equine pathway system, and I've done a series of workshops in Switzerland and Italy and also in Germany over the years, and It's something I will continue to offer my clients to do, and it's very interesting to see what can happen. However, what you see here is not from the workshops. This is a client of one of my colleagues from many years ago. The profiles, the horses these profiles were taken from was a 20-year-old horse, and he had an injury and been rested for 6 months when he had the consultation. And on that day, he measured his wither profile, measured like the red line. The owners did not want to wait for their balance saddle to arrive without riding, so they used their old saddle. So when the new saddle arrived, he measured like the blue line, so had lost quite a lot of muscle tissue there, and posture most likely during those 8 weeks using a saddle that was not appropriate. The reason he had built up to the red line was obviously the 6 months rest while he healed from his injury. So 18 weeks later, when he'd been worked in his balance saddle, this horse measured like the green line. So horses can change shape. And this is, as I said, 18 weeks in a balance saddle. You can see changes happen much quicker than that. So as I said, I've done workshops using the remedial program or equine pathway system. And we measured all horses in the beginning of day 1, then at the end of the exercises, day 1, and then we repeated the same thing on day 2. And the exercises were about leading your horse in hand, keeping them straight in the correct tempo and rhythm, leading up to lunging the horse in a functional and constructive way. And they change shape within 2 days. So it's not muscles being built up here. Some of them muscles probably relaxed and became more rounder because of that, but also posture. So what I want to come to here is, because we've all been led to believe that we need to have a saddle expert to come and fit our saddles every 6 months or so. I have a big problem with that personally, because I think my horses require more adjustment of their pads more often than that. So, in my opinion, it is my responsibility as a horse owner and rider to make sure that the saddle I use on my horse is in balance every day I ride. So, this is one of the reasons I love the balance saddling system, because it lets me do exactly that. Because with the pads I have, the base pads, the wool pads, the base pads, and the little pads you will see, I have all the tools I need to be able to keep the saddle in balance every day. So that's what I'm going to teach you to look at in the beginning. You will maybe need a little bit more help from me to do this until you get the confidence, but it's not rocket science. I won't be on the road every day because I got my own horses at home and I want to spend time at home with them and my partner and my dogs. So what I have discovered now is we have wonderful technology, and I can connect with you wherever you are via Messenger on Facebook, or which you can do excellent video calls with, or you can use Skype or Zoom, and we can connect and I can help you with keeping balance of your saddle until you're confident. And I have made a little video which is on YouTube, which you can have a look at to see what I need to see from you in those sessions. So ongoing support, if you decide to have a balanced saddling system, is not a problem, even if I'm not in your country all the time. So I also take photos of every single horse I see. I will take 6 different positions, and this is something we see a lot of with the front legs and the shoulders. This horse was 7 years old when I saw her first time. So that's the photo on your left, November 2007. She was very narrow. You can see how close the 2 front hooves are. And then she's very sort of V-shaped in her chest there. 2 years later, same horse, and she's standing wider with her front legs. So from a balance point of view, and I'm not talking saddles, I'm talking the horse's balance point of view, surely the right picture there allows a better balance for the horse than the picture on the left. And this is something we see a lot of, how the horses widen and open up the chest area a lot when they have the appropriate saddle. And why go narrow? Well, lack of collarbones, and if you have a saddle that's too narrow, that can happen, push the shoulders together. So with those 2 pictures, we are going to finish this session. And if you have booked in a consultation with me on the next upcoming trip to your area, then you will see me quite soon. If you are seeing this for the first time because your best friend have told you have to, and you think this is interesting but not booked an appointment with me, just contact me. You got my email address there, and I see what I can do for you if I can fit you in on this trip or the next one. Anyways, I say bye for now, and take care, and I'll see you all soon. Oh, yeah.